Welcome back to our channel. Tonight, we delve into a chilling true story that took place in the most unlikely of places, an ordinary apartment complex. This tale, a stark reminder that sometimes the scariest things happen in the places we're supposed to feel the safest. Our own homes. So, turn off the lights, settle in, and prepare yourself for the unsettling account of the creepy apartment horror story. Story number 1. It all began when Zoe, a young professional in her mid-20s, moved into a new apartment. It was her first place on her own, a cozy one-bedroom unit in a building that was old but charming. The rent was reasonable, the neighbors seemed friendly enough, and the location was perfect for her new job. Everything seemed fine. At first, the apartment had character: hardwood floors, vintage fixtures, and large windows that let in plenty of sunlight during the day. But there was one odd feature that Zoe couldn't quite ignore: a small, locked door in her bedroom closet. It was barely noticeable, tucked away in the far corner, and it seemed like it hadn't been opened in years. For the first few nights, everything was normal. Zoe quickly settled into her new routine, but she soon began noticing small, unsettling details. She'd come home to find her belongings slightly out of place, as if someone had been inside. At first, she brushed it off as forgetfulness. After all, moving was stressful, and her mind was preoccupied. But then, things started to escalate. She'd hear noises in the middle of the night, soft scraping sounds, like someone dragging something heavy across the floor, but always from above. The strange part, she was on the top floor. There was no apartment above hers, only the roof, and then there was the smell, a faint, musty odor that would suddenly fill the room without warning, a smell that Zoe could only describe as decay. One night, after being jolted awake by a particularly loud thud, Zoe decided she'd had enough. Grabbing a flashlight, she made her way to the closet. The locked door had always made her uneasy, and she was determined to figure out what was behind it. She shined her light at the small, rusty keyhole, half expecting to see something staring back at her. But there was nothing, just darkness. Zoe couldn't shake the feeling that whatever was causing the disturbances was somehow connected to that door. She tried contacting the landlord, asking if he had a key or if he could explain what the door was for, but all she got was vague answers and a promise to look into it. A promise that was never fulfilled. Weeks went by, and the noises continued, growing louder each night. Finally, one evening, Zoe decided to take matters into her own hands. She borrowed a set of lock-picking tools from a friend and managed to pry the door open. The small door swung open with a creak, revealing a narrow, hidden crawl space that ran between the walls. It was filthy, lined with old newspapers and dusty debris. But that wasn't the worst part. In the far corner of the crawl space, just barely illuminated by the flashlight, Zoe saw something that sent chills down her spine: a makeshift bed, fashioned from old blankets, and a series of strange, crude drawings etched into the walls. It looked like someone had been living there, but who, and for how long? Panicked, Zoe backed out of the crawl space and called the police. When they arrived, they searched the area thoroughly, but whoever had been living there was gone. The officers found evidence of recent activity: food wrappers, a nearly burnt-out candle, and a chilling discovery: a small stack of photographs of Zoe, taken while she slept. The police never found the person responsible, but Zoe moved out immediately, leaving behind her dreams of independence and that cozy apartment. Sometimes, the things we can't see are the most terrifying. Zoe's story is a reminder that what lurks in the shadows of our homes might be closer than we think. Stay vigilant, stay safe, and remember not every locked door is meant to be opened. Story number 2. Lena had just moved to a new city for a fresh start. She found an affordable apartment in a quiet, unassuming building. The place wasn't perfect, but it was hers. It was an old building with thin walls, creaky floors, and a slightly run-down feel. But Lena didn't mind. To her, It was just the first step toward a new life. On her first day, Lena met most of her neighbors' friendly faces, mostly elderly people, and a few young professionals like herself. But there was one apartment, directly across the hall from hers, that seemed off. The door was old and scratched up, with a rusty, barely readable number. And despite hearing faint noises from inside, Lena never saw anyone come or go. The first few nights were uneventful, but then the noises started. It was subtle at first, soft shuffling, the occasional thud, or the sound of something being dragged. It was always late at night, around 3 a.m., when everything else was silent. Lena assumed it was just the usual sounds of an old building, but the noises became more distinct and, frankly, more unsettling. One night, Lena was lying in bed when she heard it clearly, a rhythmic tapping, like someone knocking on the wall from inside the neighbor's apartment. It would start and stop, always in sets of 3. Tap, tap, tap. She thought about complaining but hesitated. After all, she still hadn't seen who lived there. And then one night, things took a dark turn. Lena was returning from a late shift when she finally saw her neighbor ... or so she thought. The hallway was dimly lit, and she saw a figure standing in front of the mysterious apartment door. It was an older woman, with messy gray hair and a long, tattered robe. She was just ... staring at the door, her back to Lena. Lena greeted her softly, but the woman didn't respond, didn't move. It was as if she hadn't heard Lena at all. Lena quickly slipped into her own apartment, unnerved by the encounter. She peered through her peephole, hoping to catch another glimpse of the woman, but she was gone. The hallway was empty once again. Lena brushed it off as nothing more than an odd, but harmless, neighbor. That night, the noises were louder than ever. Lena was jolted awake by the sound of something heavy being dragged across the floor, followed by soft, muffled crying. It sounded like it was coming from directly outside her door. Lena, terrified but curious, crept to her peephole. What she saw made her heart drop. The old woman was standing there, right in the middle of the hallway, staring directly at Lena's door. She was muttering something under her breath, words Lena couldn't quite make out, and in her hand, she clutched a small, broken doll. Lena backed away from the door, her heart racing. She knew she needed to call the building manager, maybe even the police, but before she could reach for her phone, the knocking started. The knocking was persistent, methodical. Lena couldn't bring herself to open the door, so she shouted through it, asking the woman what she wanted. There was no response, just the knocking. It lasted for what felt like hours, but was only minutes. Finally, it stopped, and Lena heard footsteps retreating down the hall. The next morning, Lena went straight to the building manager to report the strange behavior. But when she described the woman, the manager's face went pale. He told Lena that the apartment across the hall had been empty for months. The last tenant, an elderly woman, had passed away alone in her apartment. Her body wasn't found for days. When Lena returned to her floor, she noticed something chilling. Taped to her door was a small note, written in shaky, childlike handwriting. It read, "Thank you for listening." That was the last straw. Lena packed her things and left that very day. The noises stopped, and the hallway remained empty, but Lena couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching her. Something that never left. Story number 3. Jess was excited to move into her new apartment. She had been saving up for months to afford this place, a high-rise building with modern amenities, a great view of the city, and, most importantly, an affordable rent. The apartment was on the 8th floor, accessible by a single elevator that creaked with age, but seemed reliable enough. From the start, Jess noticed something odd about the elevator. Every time she rode it, she felt a slight chill, even in the warmest weather. She figured it was just old, not well insulated, and didn't think much of it. But it wasn't long before she realized that this wasn't just any old elevator. It started with minor inconveniences. Jess would press the button for her floor, and the elevator would stop on random levels, often empty. She assumed it was a technical glitch, something she could report to the building manager. But then, the elevator began to behave strangely. It would open on floors where the lights were flickering, and occasionally, the doors would stay open for far too long, as if waiting for someone or something to enter. One night, after a long day at work, Jess stepped into the elevator, exhausted. She pressed the button for the 8th floor, but the elevator stopped at the 5th. The doors slid open, revealing a dark, empty hallway with flickering lights. No one was there, but Jess could have sworn she felt a cold draft rush past her, sending shivers down her spine. A few nights later, Jess found herself working late again. It was past midnight when she got home, and the building was eerily quiet. She stepped into the elevator, her only company the dim, flickering overhead light. She pressed the button for her floor, but instead of going up, the elevator jolted and started descending. To the basement. Jess had never been to the basement before. It was restricted to maintenance staff only. But tonight, the doors opened, revealing a dark, musty space filled with old furniture, broken appliances, and a lingering stench of mildew. As Jess stood frozen in the elevator, she could feel something, an overwhelming sense of being watched. She frantically pressed the closed doors button, and thankfully, the elevator complied, taking her back up to her floor. But from that night on, things only got worse. The following week, Jess began noticing strange occurrences. Whenever she was in the elevator, she'd catch glimpses of movement in the small reflective panels inside. It wasn't her reflection, it was something else. A shadowy figure that seemed to linger, just out of sight, moving when she wasn't looking directly at it. One evening, Jess decided to test her growing fear. She rode the elevator late at night, her phone camera discreetly recording the ride. As the elevator descended, it once again stopped on the 5th floor, doors opening to the same empty, flickering hallway. Jess didn't see anything unusual, but when she reviewed the footage later, her blood ran cold. There, in the reflection, was a dark figure standing in the corner, unmoving, watching her. It was there for just a second before vanishing. Jess knew she couldn't stay in the building any longer. She packed up her things and planned to move out that weekend. But on her last night, as she took the elevator one final time, it began to shake violently. The lights flickered, and the elevator came to a sudden halt between floors. Panicking, Jess repeatedly pressed the emergency button, but there was no response. In the dim light, she could see her breath cold and visible, despite the summer heat. And then she heard a soft knocking coming from the elevator walls, followed by a low whisper, barely audible, but unmistakably there. It sounded like someone repeating the same phrase over and over. "Let me out," Jess screamed, frantically pressing the buttons until the elevator finally jolted back to life, taking her straight to the lobby. She ran out of the building and never looked back. Jess never found out who or what haunted that elevator. Maintenance checks revealed nothing unusual, and other tenants claimed not to have experienced anything out of the ordinary. But Jess knew what she saw, what she heard. Sometimes, the things we can't explain are the ones that haunt us the most. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon for more eerie tales. And remember ... The next time you're in an elevator late at night, you might not be riding alone.